Good morning. I can't believe we've made it through another novel together. Today we will be reading the final two chapters of Jim Ugly. We are going to start with chapter 16. I Let Jim Ugly Loose. The Swiss mountainside was packed and loaded aboard the ferry. We were to play for 3 weeks at Mr. Cornelius's own Mazeppa Theater on Geary Street. I was ready for San Francisco. I had a note carefully written out, warning my father not to come anywhere close. That D.D. Skeets was sticking to me like a tick, and Wilhelmina, too. I made a dog collar out of rope and tied my note around it with about a dozen loops of twine. At the crack of dawn, I returned to Sansom Street, a block from where I'd watched my dad catch the trolley. I dropped to my knees and tightened my arms around Jim Ugly's thick, furry neck. I have to turn you loose, I said. You can trail Dad on your own. Find him, amigo. I pulled out my father's own letter to give him a fresh sniff of it. Get going. Go on now. Sashay out of here. In hardly any time at all, he was casting for the scent. His fur seemed to bristle with excitement. He came back to me once, brushing against my leg, and looked up to me as if to make sure I wasn't trying to drive him away again. You don't see me pitching any rocks at you, do you? Don't be so touchy. Find him, amigo. I watched him sniff along the storefronts. Suddenly, he whipped around the corner and was gone from sight. I took a deep breath and turned away. I didn't think I'd call him Jim Ugly anymore. Once he found my dad, I'd figured he'd turn back into Sam Bannock's one-man dog again. But maybe he wouldn't. I began to walk and wondered how soon I'd see him again. The Mazeppa Theater was upstairs over a brownstone horse barn. There were great stretches of empty chairs at the performance that night, and those who came appeared mostly to have forgot their umbrellas and ducked in to escape the wet, dripping fog. There was a soft rattle of applause when the curtain rose and the play began. The actors had to speak up against the foghorns calling out from the bay like infernal bullfrogs. I waited in the wings for my entrance. Miss Jenny thrust Pieface into my arms to go on stage and lifted her out again the moment she bounded off stage. She didn't know that Amigo had come close to killing her little dog. I didn't imagine the wildness could ever be entirely trained out of Amigo, and that suited me fine. If every so often the ghost of a wolf came leaping out of him, the world would have to just stand back for a moment. He was entitled to be what he was. I was dimly aware of the Austrian soldier coming in his polished steel helmet to take my arm and lead me on stage. I wondered what had happened to Abner, who was usually costumed for the part. This actor was taller, with longer arms and thinner fingers around my arm. We were out in front of the footlights before I happened to glance into his face. I saw my father. He appeared high, mighty, and big as all creation. Dad! He gave me a wink with his upstage eye. He shielded me from the audience as he balanced the apple on my head. If you're going to be an actor, Jake, don't embarrass the play with gawkish dialogue of your own. Hold still. But they're out there, all of them, I muttered, hardly letting my lips move. That will be convenient. It was time to deliver my line, and I remembered to look fierce and defiant. Father, father, I fear not. Let the arrow find its mark. To my surprise, the Austrian soldier in the polished steel helmet began to speak. Oh, huntsman, stay your hand a moment, said my father in his rich stage voice. How like a tiny gem sits the apple. Would you like a larger target? Such gems I have in abundance. You will find me gracious in these negotiations. If not, proceed. I don't know what Miss Jenny thought of the Austrian soldier suddenly taking it into his head to burst into dialogue. It was clear to me that Dad was talking directly to the audience. He was telling the yellow-leg huntsman to hold his fire until they could talk. Gems? The diamonds! The Arizona girl shot the apple off my head, and I rushed off stage into my father's embrace. Then he fixed me with his playful actor's eyes. What's this, Jake? A second thespian in the family? We must seek out better material to display your talents. Perhaps Wilhelmina can help. You've met her, of course. Yes. Do you like her? I think so, I said. I think she means to have me horsewhipped." He laughed and dismissed the matter with a toss of a hand. We walked downstairs to the dressing room where Amigo was curled up waiting. Dad petted him and I petted him. "Your dog's got a fine nose," I said softly. I realized that I'd only borrowed Amigo for a little while. "Yes." "He knew right off you weren't in the graveyard." "Axie meant well," he said with a flash of anger. "He thought it would throw off Dee Dee Skeets forever to put on that funeral. But he should have spared you, Jake. He should have told you." When the curtain fell on the last act, the theater emptied. But I saw Wilhelmina and Mr. Cornelius in one of the private boxes, and across the theater, Dee Dee Skeets, sitting with his derby hat on his lap. And in the back, I saw Axie. The footlights were still ablaze when my father stepped in front of the curtain. "Cornelius, you've encouraged that yellow-legged nitwit to fire lead at me and to otherwise disturb the peace of my family. I retire from the game. You win. The gems are yours. I will lead you to them tomorrow." "None of your actors' tricks," Mr. Cornelius shouted. "That funeral didn't fool us." "On my word as an actor, no actor's tricks," replied my father. He seemed to be enjoying himself in front of the footlights, as if he were writing a play for himself on the spot. "The diamonds were not in the coffin," Mr. Cornelius cried out scornfully. "They've been moved. Tomorrow at 7 in the morning, we will assemble at the Ferry Building for something of a journey. Agreed?" "Agreed," said Mr. Cornelius. "And you, Wilhelmina?" "Yes," she said airily. "Let's do fetch the diamonds, Sam, and then I'll have you horsewhipped. I may even do it myself." Chapter 17, Blowfly. We reached Smoke Tree Junction at 4:23 the next afternoon. Dad had wired ahead to have Burroughs waiting at the train depot. "Do you expect me to ride one of those things?" Wilhelmina protested. "Suit yourself, Willie," my dad replied. "The diamond mine can't be more than 10 miles off. You're free to walk." "What diamond mine?" Wilhelmina exclaimed with sudden awe. "Didn't our friend Cornelius tell you?" my dad replied. "He has not been entirely forthcoming, has he? A diamond mine indeed. He came into possession of one only to misplace it." "How could anyone misplace a diamond mine?" "It was remarkably careless," my dad said. Mr. Cornelius stood with his jaw shut tight as an oyster. The yellow leg stood behind him like an unhappy shadow. When everyone was seated on the burros, my dad snapped out 3 white handkerchiefs. "You will understand if I insist that you be blindfolded. Only Axie here knows the exact location of the diamond mine, and Axie is a man of secrets. Here you are, blindfolds of the finest linen." "Me too?" asked Wilhelmina. "Most certainly you." "But no woman can look fetching in a blindfold, not even Justice and all those marble statues." And so we set out for Blowfly, with Amigo racing on ahead of us. A hot desert wind had come up, blowing sand in our faces, and Wilhelmina stopped complaining about the blindfold and the burro. I think all her protesting was just to keep herself in my father's eye. And I was sure he had wired the burros instead of horses, because it took the frills out of Mr. Cornelius to be led along on such a backwoodsy little animal. Before long, Dad led the party off the road, and he took us wandering in great loops and switchbacks. He'd have them so confused they wouldn't be able to find their noses without a compass. Axie hadn't said a word to me, even in San Francisco, but I found him pulling up beside me. "I don't blame you for being mad," he said. I just looked straight ahead. "It pained me to see you grieving, Jake. It was hard to lie to you, but I had to do things that way. It might save your pa's life with that bounty hunter breathing so close. I didn't think you'd be able to act up the tears if you knew the pine box was only full of ice. And then Mr. Cornelius and the lady turned up, and I'd figure I better not tell you yet. I'm not mad at you, Axie. I reckon you had to do it the way you did." "I'm obliged, Jake." I took a breath and hoped to let the subject drop away. "Did Aurora find feathers for her hat in Sacramento?" I asked. "Lots of them. But why she needs feathers in her hat to feed chickens and blowfly, I'll never know." He fell back to lead the pack for a while, and I rode side by side with my father. "Sam!" Wilhelmina yelled out. "Are you still there? How do I know you won't abandon us to perish in this savage, God-forsaken desert? I won't do that, Willie. You abandoned me once before at the wedding chapel, and I'll horsewhip you for it. He turned his glance my way and mumbled, Heck has no fury like a woman scorned, as the poet said. Or did he use stronger language? All my friends were there, Sam. I was standing in so much white lace, I looked like an Alps mountaintop. There was enough rice to plant China. I said, You could have told me you were going to get married again. She's not much like your mother, is she, Jake? No, sir. I figured it might be easier to catch you by surprise. Done and over with. But I like her, I said. I caught his glance. He seemed pleased. We were zigzagging all over the place, but heading in the general direction of Blowfly. Amigo had gone out of sight, and Dad gave him a whistle. Come here, Amigo. I was surprised that Amigo didn't come at the sound of his voice. Amigo, I called, here. He burst out of the dust and came bounding up on his big paws and circled me. I looked at Dad. I guess he didn't hear you, I said. He heard me all right, my dad said, and thought for a moment. Jake, I think you've got yourself a dog. I broke out and smiled. Jim Ugly was mine. Amigo was mine. I had myself a dog. We were swinging back toward the road. Finally, I asked, Is there really a diamond mine out here in Blowfly? You'll see for yourself, he said with a narrow grin. And then, speaking softly, he told me what had happened. He had Amigo with him in Grass Valley, where Mr. Cornelius had rented the theater and hired him to act in The Huddlestone Ghost. Grass Valley was in the high Sierras, and Axie had come to see him in the play. My dad decided to show him what a powerful nose Amigo had for tracking. I found an old army cap someone had discarded behind the hotel. Amigo tracked it about 4 miles up a mountainside to a jumble of crevices and fallen rocks. We came upon a yellow-legged sergeant planting diamonds as if they were corn seed, and there stood Cornelius in leather boots telling him what to do. They were salting a mine with diamonds. He could sell shares in it and swindle people out of millions of dollars. Were they real diamonds, I asked. Real enough, Jake. After they left, Axie and I picked out all the stones we could find with our pocket knives. We must have collected 30 or 40 pounds of rough, sparkling diamonds. I knew that Cornelius wouldn't let millions of dollars worth of gems sit unattended. They were most certainly junk diamonds. Junk diamonds? Expensive trash. The sort of diamonds that end up in drill bits and cheap watches. I'd even found one discarded fragment with a facet cut into it. After my performance that night, I told Cornelius I had his diamonds. That diamond mine of yours not only grows diamonds, it cuts them too, I said, throwing down the stone with the facet. He went red in the face, of course. He offered to make me a partner, but I declined. He said he had to put up his interest in the Mazeppa Theater to raise money to buy the trash diamonds. He had even used Wilhelmina's money. She was bound to lose everything if she didn't help him. He floated the rumor among my fellow actors that someone had put a bounty on my head. I began to feel like a fly in a room full of fly swatters. The next thing I knew, Dee Skeets was taking pot shots at me. Right from the beginning, Cornelius has been giving him orders. I chose to disappear. I'll bet that's why you didn't show up for your own wedding, I blurted out. That yellow leg is such a poor shot that he'd likely have hit Wilhelmina. I thought we'd be safe here and arranged for the diamonds to be sent in a cheap coffin to Smoke Tree Junction. When Axie and I went to pick it up, I saw Cornelius's hired man step off the train. The yellow leg was getting too close for comfort. I had to leave you behind without a word. I left the coffin with Axie. Mr. Cornelius dug it up. The box was empty. Axie is a man of finest caution, my dad said. Have you any notion what he did with the diamonds? I shook my head. My dad leaned closer and lowered his voice to a bemused whisper. He mixed them with chicken mash and fed them to his hens. That herd of chickens, Jake, is a diamond mine on legs. Those hens are running around with gems in their claws. I glanced back at Axie, who gave me a finger flick of his hat, as if he knew exactly what we were talking about. And maybe he did. If we were only going to Axie's chicken barn in Blowfly, I didn't see any reason to blindfold everyone. Pure theater, my dad explained grandly. Look at them trailing, one after another. It's perfect staging. If you're going to be an actor, Jake, you must develop a sense of theater. A distant yell caught our ears. It was Aurora in her buggy over on the road. She turned off and spun across the trickling creek bed toward us. Axie came forward, handing the lead burro's reins to Dad. He squinted his eyes at Aurora. "What are you doing here?" she shouted out. "Axie, how come you didn't let me know you were back?" Axie seemed alarmed to find Aurora all dressed up, with feathers in her hat and suitcases piled in the buggy. The wind was with her, and she reached us in a cloud of dust. "Aurora," Axie said softly, "where are you going?" "Axie, I can't listen to one more chicken cackle. I don't want to homestead out here. I want to homestead in the city, and that's where you'll find me." "Did you water the chickens?" Axie asked. "I'm through watering chickens." "Who's taking care of them?" "They'll have to take care of themselves. I swear you worry more about those chickens than you do me. I opened the barn door wide yesterday morning and chased a lot of them out." "Aurora," Axie murmured. It was the sound of pure pain. But my dad took it all with a grin. "Those hens are gone, Aurora. Let loose? On the run?" He swung a leg over a burrow and planted his legs on the ground. "Gentlemen and lady, take off your blindfolds. You've heard this startling news. The great Tumbleweed Diamond Mine is on the march once more. Your gems, Cornelius, are in the gizzards of the dispossessed poultry. I have no doubt that chicken hawks and coyotes have taken their toll, and jackrabbits have chased the rest. I'm afraid you'll have hundreds of square miles of desert to search. It's falling dark, but make haste. Look there. I believe there's a rooster in that cactus patch. With luck, you may catch enough cackling gemstones to make a gaudy little necklace." "I'm ruined," Mr. Cornelius cried out, and his weeping willow eyebrows rose as if blown in a sudden storm. Aurora fainted dead away when she learned she'd had enough diamonds in the barn to hang in the sky at night, only to turn them loose. Mr. Cornelius pleaded for compass directions to the train station in Smoke Tree Junction. He whipped his burro, and Dee Dee Skeets followed like a dusty vulture with fading yellow stripes down his legs. "I want my pay," he bellowed at Mr. Cornelius's back. "I cornered Bannock for you. I want the bounty money." "Idiot, there was no bounty money." It looked as if the yellow leg was going to stick to Mr. Cornelius like a cockleburro. It was almost a week before we returned to San Francisco, all of us. The Arizona girl had been able to replace me easily enough in San Francisco, but she said I could have the job back anytime I wanted. Wilhelmina seemed greatly subdued. She never once spoke of losing her savings to Cornelius and his junk diamonds. She hadn't known the yellow leg took his orders from Mr. Cornelius. "He might have killed you, Sam, and to think I was trying to help that Cornelius," she wailed, dabbing her nose with a handkerchief as lacy as a handful of air. And then one day she was laughing again and said she guessed she wouldn't horsewhip my father after all. "Unless you stand me up again in all that white lace and rice." I kind of liked the idea of my dad marrying her. I saw the wolf come out in Amigo only once during those days. Wilhelmina had sent me on an errand to the Palace Hotel on Market Street, and I'd tied Amigo outside to a lamppost. When I'd returned, he'd chewed through the rope. He was sitting beside it, his yellow eyes flaring up like heat lightning. I nodded to him respectfully and said, "Hello, Jim Ugly." The end. I hope that you liked the story of Jim Ugly.